Hello everyone, welcome to SQL Introduction. So once you log in here, what you need to do is either you can, when you are on the first time, just click on login sign up, and you use your Gmail and assign your password. Retype your password, and it will create the account for you. And next time you come in, you're gonna click on the login. Because you're already a user. Oops. All right, and then I'm gonna go to the members page where you're gonna have access to the SQL one. Okay, so you click on SQL and you're gonna see the folder system in here. So the installation part is where we already done. Okay, so you have those installation things available in here. Now the next thing was, after installation, the pre-readings and the videos that you had to watch, so that were in here. You might be going through those things. So you're gonna see some these 4 videos that I asked you to watch. So keep working on this one. And now, so these was pre-training stuff. Now, so when we're gonna have the class going on, I'm gonna put the practice in here. Okay, it might not have anything right now. And then what we're gonna do is I'm gonna give you the week to work on that practice, and then I will publish the solution for that practice. Okay, and if you want me to look through the practice that you have done, because you're going to write the queries, and if you want me to look before I post the solution, you are always welcome to send me in, and then I can give you the feedback in the class, that what is the name of the practice that you're going to do for this session, for a particular session. And then I'm going to put some reading material when we're going to go through. So I'm going to put the material in here, but I will be telling you in the class, that you will need to do this, you will need to do this. It's just, it will be available from here. And then if you have, the last one is the recorded video and the query. So whatever we're going to do, watch in the class, I will put not necessarily that video, but the same video that I have more clear, chopped off, like the conversation that we have. So it's straightforward, just a lesson. Okay, and then with the lesson, associated queries. What are the queries that so because what's going to happen is we're going to work in here, and I'm going to type in bunch of queries, and that session will be recorded. So all the query that I have for that particular session, I will put it in one file. So you're going to see 2 of the 5 session and 1 query associated with 1 session and 1 query file. Okay, so this would be the cleaner version, but what I'm going to do is, if you need the actual class recording, I can post that separately. You understood how you're going to access the material throughout the class, the course. So if you haven't seen the course yet, this is the course that we're going to follow throughout the class. We will be these are the objectives that we have for the class. So here is one more thing, that when you come to the class, because not you, but I know some people come to me and then say, Andy, I want to learn the queries, just get started with the class. Is just not writing the queries. Be aware with all the moving parts that are associated with the SQL server, and what are the different kind of systems you have, because there are different kind of systems. You all gotta write the SQL on those systems, but based on the system, your query might be a little different. Okay, because you have to tune it, you're gonna work on the query to make it run faster, those kind of things. So with the class, we're gonna focus throughout the class on writing queries. Okay, I'm not saying that we're gonna go on everything. No, the focus would be that, but I'm gonna cover other different things that I want you to get introduced with those things. We're not gonna get into the detail for those, but when someone talk about DBA, and if you don't know, if you're writing the SQL queries, it doesn't look good. So at least this on your own environment, it's very small thing, but when you go onto the company, what are the difference that you're going to experience? So we're going to talk about all those things, and then at the end we're going to do the project. So pretty much we're going to follow what I have listed in here, and we're going to talk about the difference between these two systems, OLTP and OLAP, the data warehousing. We're going to talk about what are the SQL environments. We're going to talk about little bit securities in the SQL server that is more associated with the DBAs. We're going to talk about the entity relationship diagram, which is if you have your database, how you going to see your complete database on one page? What's the big picture of the database? If you have like 20 different tables or 30 or 50 different tables, how those tables are connected. So if you see in here, I have employee table and I have, let's say, person.address. Is there any connection between these two tables? So all those things are represented by ERD. So in here, because what happens is when your organization is generating the data or getting the data from somewhere, on the SQL server, it cannot be stored in just one table. Okay, so think about if you think about Excel sheet, it cannot be stored everything on one Excel spreadsheet. What you do is, let's say if company is doing a business, if he has customers, he will put one tab, and on one tab he will put the list of the customers, all the customers they have, their phone number, their address, whatever the information they have about customers. And then they have another tab on the Excel where they will put all the details of the customer transaction. So each customer, what transaction they are doing, would be on the separate tab. Then if the company is selling products, they're going to have a separate tab for the products where all the products they would be selling. So what I'm saying is they're not going to put everything on one spreadsheet and make you find through that big table or big spreadsheet everything. What are the products, what are the customers, what transaction they do. So it's very hard to get the data out of when you have one just sheet. So the same thing in the SQL server, you have different tables. Those are called tables in here, and each table has information about particular entity. So if we talk about employees, if we talk about department information, if we talk about person address, if we talk about location, product, category, so a little bit about each entity is stored in a separate table. Okay, so if the customers have their sale transactions, it would be stored in the sales history or purchase order detail, purchase order header, those kind of things. What they have purchased, what they're selling, that would be two different tables. So everything is stored in the table. And now let's say when you have to connect these two things, let's say all the customers, you say these are the transaction made by the customer. You don't put everything on the customer's transaction table, right? So let's say if you have customer transaction on a tab, you're not going to have necessarily every information about the customer, right? You're not going to have every information about the things they have purchased. So let's say if they say on the customer transaction tab, they're just going to say the customer ID 1 or customer number 1 purchased this. Customer number 1 million purchased this. But if you need to know about the customer 1 or 1 million, you need to go to customer tab and find what customer 1 is, what customer 1 million is, right? So same thing in the SQL server, when you're going to have to find the information about same thing, what you're going to do is in the Excel, you do a lookup, you try to find out, okay, my customer 1 is, you go to the customer 1 and you find out. So in here, you're going to do joins between the tables to get the data together. What's my customer information for each of the transaction detail? So you would be joining all these in tables together in order to get certain information. Not every table, but the tables that are related. So how do you know those relationships exist between the tables? So if I say there is some relationship between person.contact and human resources.employee, you don't know that relationship. So that relationship is nothing but in the ERD. So if you don't know that what ERD is, you don't know there is a relationship that exists and where you can find that. So we're going to talk about when we go with the classes, we're going to introduce those concepts, but in very basic ways. We're not going to go into much detail how to create those, how do you do those things. So and about the security, same thing. We're just going to go into look what are those. We're not going to go into the detail because the scope of this is more how to do the SQL queries, but get introduced with the other parts, because all these parts are itself another course, usually each of them. So but when I come in here, hold on, let me open. All right, so what I was saying is about the ERDs. When you design your database, that's where when you create your database diagram, what tables are connected to each other and where you're going to put which information. Do you need 2 tables for that data? Do you need 3 tables for that data? So all those things are done by architecture level, and how many what kind of, so So it's just not they're going to design the databases. They're going to also design what system you're going to have to run that kind of server. So depend on how much data you're going to have in the server or in the database that you're collecting from the customer, you have to decide when you're going to install your SQL server on certain machine, how many CPUs do you need, how many memory do you need to run those kind of systems, the servers they call. What is the design of the server? Everything, those kind of things were decided by the architect level. So this is like the top level in the industry that you can go, and after like 10-20 years of experience, you have those kind of things, you have those experience, you design the systems. But right now we are on the developer stage. We are getting started in writing the queries, understanding how those things work, and then when you get to know that picture, you're going to move on the upper hierarchical level. So you have the developer, and now there are another domain within the SQL is the DBA that are called database administration. So think about, there is a one company like Bank of America. They have their databases, but they could have hundreds of databases. Okay, each one for each domain. Because they are like very huge. They have different, so many regions. They have so many customers. So it's not that they have just one database and one server. Right now, this is my server where I'm logged in, and these are all my databases. So managing this one would be easier, but think about when I have thousands of databases and like hundreds of servers running throughout the US. Each region have one server, or each state have one server, that kind of thing. Maintaining those things itself another task. So those are done by the DBA. Just not this, they give the permission, they create the system to make sure those are running, they're giving the good performance. It's not like the system is very slow. So all those things are controlled by the DBA. Who can get into the system, the security part of the systems are done by the DBA. Okay, so that's another domain which is little different than writing queries. This is more like managing. So the DBA also says, okay, when the system fails, let's say something goes wrong with the system that customer is facing, something goes wrong, what the system we're gonna connect as called as disaster failure. So if there is some disaster happens, what's the failover system? When failover, it starts connecting to that, because you don't want to interrupt the customer service, right? So let's say if something happens in New York, and you have your system affected by that disaster, where all customers that are coming to that server will be rerouted to somewhere in the California or somewhere in the Middle East, like Chicago or somewhere, that server. So there are different servers, failover, everything. It's like very huge thing. So many moving things around SQL. It's just not writing queries. That's what my point is. Okay, and you can always interrupt in between. You don't need to be wait for me to finish. Feel free to jump in between, ask as many as questions you have, those kind of stuff. Okay, so never think about that, let me finish and then you're gonna ask, never, because this is the place where you're gonna learn most of the stuff about the SQL. So don't think, if I'm gonna ask this question, how would it look like? Would it be too dumb? No. If you don't understood anything, if you don't understand anything, ask 10 times, 20 times. I'm ready to keep going on and on with that. I'm fine. Okay, I want to make sure that you learn when you interactive, so feel free, because once it gets started conversation, I enjoy it, and I give you more than enough. So we're gonna use this interface. Okay, so there could be different interfaces. All right, so even what you're connecting to right now with using the SSMS or DB Weaver, whatever tool you use, you connect to the database management system. Now, what is database management system? Why do you need a database management system? Okay, that's the first question we should start with. What is database management system? So database management, so SQL is a query language. It's a language that you use against any of the database management system to get the data out of it. What gets stored in there, maybe via, when you go to the website, you fill in the forms, everything gets stored somewhere. It's somewhere is nothing but the database management system. Okay, so the CSS and HTML, think about this. When you go on somewhere online and you see this, everything, the web page that you see in here, right? Those web pages are written in HTML and CSS. Okay, so it's all whatever the data. Yeah. I'm just. Mhm. So the HTML and CSS is used to design the websites. Okay, and the data is static. So let's say what you want to do is when you're designing your web page and you say, okay, in here I want this page to be customized. When person logs in, I want the username to be shown, or I want these things to be changed based on every user when they log in. So it has to come from somewhere based on the user login, right? So, or let's say when they come on the page and I want this information to be saved from them and I want to store it somewhere. Where are you going to store it? So these containers that you collect the information would be saved in the database, but not necessarily that the things that are not going to change would be coded within the HTML. So you write the HTML page and you put this information which is not going to change forever, would be just sits with the HTML tags. But the things that you want to show, right now I don't have anything on the web page, but think about when you log in and it says, it gives you information, everything about you. Let's say you log in into your Bank of America portal. It gives you your bank information. It gives you your account number. It gives you your balances. It gives you your transaction. So think about Bank of America is written in HTML. Yeah. So the HTML is more used for designing the web pages. It has nothing to do with it, just works in conjunction. So the database is more like a backend thing, which is behind the website. So you're gonna be on the behind, but the HTML is the another team, application developer they are called. They would, or the web developer. So they would be working on designing the front part, and you would be working on designing the back part. And now once both are designed, they're going to talk to each other in order to show the data to the customer. So they designed this part. You designed the database to store the information that the front end web developer sends you. So when they click send, this information will be sent to you in the database. So now it's your problem to store in the database, and when it's asked, when the user logs in, you have to give it back. So you're going to write the procedures and the objects to store the data. So you're going to store in the table, but when the user logs in, you have to show them back. You have to write the process. You have to write the SQL queries to get the data from the table. So you will be doing things on the back end, and you will be providing that data to the HTML person who is working on the front end. Answer your question? Okay, perfect. Yep. So the HTML is one language. You have .NET. You have, like you said, CSS is just the HTML goes with, but C#, there are PHP, there are so many languages that front end can be built in, Java, script, and everything. So there are so many different front end languages, web application development. But so now, so here is the thing. You as I said, for developing the front end, you have HTML, you have PHP, you have .NET, you have C#. Okay. Now when you connect with the database, it's just not SQL Server database. You have different database management system. Okay, so you have Oracle. You heard of Oracle? Microsoft SQL Server, on which we are working. And then you have DB2, which is the IBM. And then you have MySQL, okay, which used to be separate but now owned by Oracle. So those are different database management systems. So that's what I was coming next. The SQL is accepted by all those systems. SQL is the language, okay, that is accepted by Oracle, that is accepted by Microsoft SQL, that is accepted by DB2, that is accepted by MySQL. Okay, so those are all database management systems. They provide you the solution. They provide you all those things, how your server would be, what your server would be, and everything. But all you're going to do is write the SQL to get the data from those database management systems. Now you can ask me, what's the difference? Can I use the SQL that I learned from this class on all of them? Yes, but no. Why I say is this, because 90% of the SQL is same, but because they create their own management system, there are little differences. But if you know one, you can learn the other languages very easily. You just need to find out the differences between those. So it's 10% variation, 5% variation, when you go from one SQL to another. Basically going from one database management to another. Another example would be Sybase, PeopleSoft. You heard of those things maybe. So now why I'm saying is, you have the SQL is the query and database management system on which you're going to write the queries. Now, why do you need a database management system? When it's called a true database management system, when it's a database management system, it has to follow the 4 properties. It's called ACID properties. If my database management or database is following these 4 properties, I can call this as a database management system. Otherwise, I cannot call that as a database management system. Now, what are those 4 properties? So if the system is following the 4 properties, it's called as a database management system, a true database management system. So it's called, first is atomicity. You might have read in the reading that I provided, atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Okay, so these are the 4 properties. Now, why do you need these 4 properties to be followed by database management system? Think about this. If you're working on Bank of America and you're doing certain transaction, and you say, I want to transfer this money from my check-in account to saving account. Okay, you took the $100 from your check-in and you put it into the saving. Let's say your system fails. I mean, not your, but let's say Bank of America system failed. And they took the money out and they didn't put you in your check-in, and they didn't put it back to your saving. Would you be happy? No one would be happy with that. $100 gone, right? So the system, it says it has to be atomic. If the transaction happens, it has to be happen completely. If the money is taken out, either it has to be sent to some account what it was said. So what was your transaction? Take my money from this account and put it in my saving. That was your transaction, right? So because of the system failed, was it complete? No. So if it isn't complete, you put back money in my checking account. So, or if the transaction is complete, it should go in the saving. It shouldn't be that it's gone somewhere, So because the system failed, it's not a reason to take your money and then say we don't know what happened that time, So to follow those things when the transaction happens, it has to happen all or none. Its property is called atomicity. Okay. So the transaction is complete, all or none would be the property that database management system has to follow. So if any failure occurs, everything you get back as a data. So atomicity is all should happen or none. Now the second is consistency. Now when you are storing the data in the database should be consistent. It shouldn't be, you can put in the telephone number column, you shouldn't put the alphabets, or in your SSN number, you cannot put ABC if it's not allowed. So the database system allows you to collect the consistent database, what you want to collect. Okay. If it's a date of birth, you cannot put some special characters in there. So the consistency is basically you're trying to get consistent data. There are certain rules that you're going to follow to save the data. So if the database management system has to follow these property too. Now the third is isolation. What is isolation? So let's say when you go into Bank of America website, there are millions of customers log in at the same time. So the system shouldn't interfere with one transaction with the other one. Everyone should, whatever they're doing should be separate, isolated from everyone else. So it's called an isolation. So what does it allow? It allows multiple users to work together on the same system at the same time. It's concurrency, right? Okay. All right. So it's not like when you do $100 from here and you say put in my saving, if it puts in someone else and someone else was doing transaction, their money comes in your saving. What's going on? It's not correct. Okay. So that's what the isolation is. It separates your transaction from someone else, from everybody else, basically. So it's concurrent system. Multiple user can work on the same system at the same time. Now the last is the durability. What is durability? Durability helps if system crashed, you should be able to recover everything. Okay. So let's say if something happened on the server, got destroyed, it's not that the data is lost. No, that's not an excuse. So when you make your system, you make them durable. So if anything happens to that system, you should have something. You should have everything, not something, sorry. You should have everything. You can miss something, but because that was happening at the last moment, but you try to maximize data from that disaster. Okay. So but it shouldn't harm the customer in that way. So the durability is basically you make sure your data is durable. Okay, all right. So if these 4 properties are followed by any of the database management system, it's called a true database management system, or that's called as a database management system. Okay, so that's why these are the 4 things. Think about this. It's not just storing the data. They are providing all these solutions with that, and that's why it's called as a database management system. So you're still storing the data in your Excel, but it's not a database management system. The Access, you heard of Access? Microsoft Access, that's the database management system, but not the Excel spreadsheet, because it doesn't provide you the atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. Okay, not up to that level. So that's why you have database management system built by different providers, Microsoft, IBM, Oracle. Okay. All right. Yep. Now, if you understood about the DBMS, we're going to use the interface to connect to the DBMS. Now, for the class purpose, some people have who had the Windows, they had installed the local server on their system and they're working on that. Or if you like, if someone couldn't install it, they're connecting to my server, but everyone will be working on the same AdventureWorks database. So basically, you have server right now. So server is nothing but a computer machine. Okay, so server is nothing different. Why it's called server? Because it's little bit powerful than your laptop. Okay, so for now, because when you're connecting to my server, it's just installed on my laptop and then you're connecting to that. Because I don't have many users and I don't have much data. But when the company is big, they have terabytes of data, my laptop wouldn't be support those. My laptop has like 8 gig of RAM, it's not enough. So servers which has like 64 gig of RAM, 1 terabyte of data, 32 core processor, mine is like 2 or 4 core processor. So that's not enough for millions of people. So that's why when the machine becomes powerful, it's called server. Okay, so server is nothing but machine on which you install SQL Server. Okay, SQL Server is a database management system. So you're going to install, so it's all done by not your other people in the company, network people. So they build the system, they install the SQL Server on that, and they say, okay, the link I sent to you is the same way will be sent to you in the company, and they will say you're going to connect to this server, you're going to use your username and password to connect it. So you don't need to worry about everything other than connecting. How they set up, what's the system, nothing. You just need to know about the databases that you need, what are the tables in there. So the server can have multiple databases. Okay, it's just not one. So one server can have multiple databases. All right. Now, when you have the databases in the system, okay, or in the server, the databases are, if it's designed in different ways for the different system. Now, the server could be OLTP and OLAP, okay, or the database design could be OLTP and OLAP. What is OLTP? OLTP is Online Transaction Processing Server. And what is OLAP? OLAP is Online Analysis Processing Server. Now, what are those? So just think about this as this one is your transaction server, which is so let's say if you're a company, Bank of America, your server which is facing to customer, it's called as a transaction server, okay, or OLTP. And now for Bank of America, what they have is the other server which is called as a data warehouse, would be nothing but Online Analysis Processing Server. So data warehouse, which would be for in-house use if they have to do the analysis on their data. Okay, they cannot go into the transaction server and do the analysis. Why? Because it's gonna interfere with the customer, what they're doing in. It makes them slow basically. Because when you do the analysis, the queries are huge and it takes so much time, it blocks things what customers are doing. So that's why they want to keep these two separate servers. So when they do the analysis, they have different server, and when the customer comes in, they're doing their transaction, they have different server. Okay. And now why do you need two different types? The thing is, the transaction server is little different in design than analysis services or analysis server. Okay. The transaction server is more built for shorter queries or shorter transactions. So because when you come in, you just, take the money in, put the money out, and millions of customers are coming in. Okay. And they want it to be done quickly. So the transaction server has so many transactions, people are coming in. But the analysis services has very few transactions, but those are huge transactions. So could be someone is running the query to give me all the customers in North America and who are above, their account contains more than $10,000, so if you're doing that kind of an analysis throughout the US, that's a huge query that you're running. It might take 30 minutes to get all the data. So the number of transactions is only one for let's say few transactions per minute on the analysis services, but those would be huge. But on the transaction server, the transaction would be small and would be in turn, so many number of transactions. So the way these systems are designed or built is little different. The design itself is different. Okay, so try to read the document. It will talk about the differences, but you understood what's the main difference. So even if you one more big difference is the analysis servers contains the history, everything from starting to till date. Okay, but the transaction server doesn't contain everything. It just contains last 1 year or 2 year of data, because they want to make system faster. So think about, if the transaction system contain all the history, they will become slow because they have a lot of data, right? Because let's say if your company is 10 years or 20 years in business, if you put everything on transaction server, terabytes of data is there. It's going to make system slow. So what you do is you just keep the 1 year worth of data on the transaction server, and you store everything on the analysis server or the data warehouse. Okay, so even if you have been to Bank of America, you might have seen your customer with them for 20 years or 10 years, but it just show you the statements for 10 years or the transactions for 2 years, not 10 years. Only last year or 2 years of transaction. They don't show you everything, but they have everything. If you see somewhere on the says, if you need history older than that, you can request it separately and then we'll get it to you. So where those things come from? Those things come from analysis server, data warehouse. Okay, so that's why you see that kind of stuff. So previously, I think when I started banking, it was 1 year, 6 months of data, but now they do 2 years or something. So because the systems are getting powerful, the story is not a problem. So that's why they're trying to put more, but not everything. Right? Okay. So to handle, both the systems has different utility. This one is more customer facing and this one is more in-house for the analysis. So the system design, the database design is different. The way the tables are designed would be smaller for the transaction, but for the analysis, so that when you do the analysis, you might have to get the data from 15 different tables, right? So what you do is, when you move the data from OLTP to OLAP, how those systems would be get in sync? You have the data coming in this one on the transaction server, right? How do you move the data to the analysis services or your data warehouse? We're going to talk about that. How the system gets synced in between, so that whatever the transaction happens comes into this one. Because when you have the analysis, it might be coming from 15 different tables. So what they do is, when they move the data from one system to another system, they combine those tables. So let's say they put the 3 tables together would become just one table in the analysis. So that it's just not directly copying the data from one system to another system. It's transforming the data. So let's say you had 3 tables in here. When it goes to analysis server or the data warehouse, it would be just one table. Why? Because you don't want to make joins between the tables to get the data. You want to make less joins, because the joins are costlier when you run the queries. So you try to do is store as much as information in one table, so you don't have to do jump from one table to other, from other table to the third table. So the analysis servers are designed differently, so you just cannot copy the data from one place to another place, so it's not that easy. So we're going to talk about that. What that brings is, moving the data is another domain is called as BI developer. BI. So these are next. Once you know the SQL, those BI developers are nothing but business intelligence developer. What they do is, they use different tools. Those are called as BI tools, business intelligence tools, to move the data. So they just need not moving the data, they're transforming the data. The data that was sitting in 3 tables in the transaction server, which is collected from the user, now it's going into one table. So how to combine those data? Now those data would be moved by using those tools. Okay, and they cannot do it like continuously. So what they do is they create jobs on the system, and then the data will be copied in the midnight when there is less crowd on the server, or when there is a less traffic on the server. So nighttime are the best time usually if you are in the US to copy the data, because some everywhere, wherever, wherever the system is, if it's night, you copy the data at that time, because usually people will be sleeping and the system will be a little less traffic, little slow. So that time you copy the data, because if you do that, try to move the data in the daytime, you are using the resources for the system to copy the data from one system to another. So that's why you try to avoid, and you do it in the nightly. So sometimes this analysis or the data warehouse are one day late. It doesn't contain everything till late. It's always until midnight, some kind of thing, based on how company has their process set up. Okay, all right. So the BI developer, they develop those packages to copy the data, or the jobs to copy the data. Okay, so that's their one thing. The another thing is, when you're doing the analysis, it will be used by some people who are in the higher management or the managers, right? So what they do is, the BI developer, they create the report, because you will be analyzing same data over and over, right? But just because the data is changing every day, you want to see the same data. You don't want to write query every time. So what they do is, they write the query, they make nice reports, and they make it available to managers. So those BI developers do, but it's called as the reporting services. Okay, so they move the data, they make the reports. And then the third thing is, think about when you're storing everything in the data warehouse, at some point of time it's going to get very big. So when it gets very big, they create another layer on top of database. It's called as a multi-dimensional database. Right now what we have is a two-dimensional database. They create multi-dimensional database. Don't worry much about it, but it makes the system very fast. The query on the analysis service or the data warehouse, that takes 30 minutes. On the multi-dimensional database, it takes 5 minutes, 2 minutes, that kind of thing. So it's another layer on top of your database that helps to get the data faster. So those are the things that are done by BI developer. And if you have seen, another course that I have is the SSIS and SSRS beginners to advanced level course. So that's the next course. Once you're in the industry for this about 1 or 2 years, then you can take this course. So the SSIS is nothing but the integration services, which is used to copy the data. The reporting services is to create the reports. And this is about the multi-dimensional database, this course. So once you know these two for 3-4 years, 3 years, 2 years, at least, then you can go to this course, I would suggest, after that. Okay, so it's just step by step. And then with the same thing, you have one more course, is the DBA. I don't take that because I'm full with this, so you can have the database administration course. So all those architecture course, it's all like different steps within the SQL. It's not same, right? It's all moving with SQL, but there are different domains you can decide to go, once you get in. All right. So now you were saying about the TXT files. Where does the data stored? So the database, when you create the database, the SQL server has two files associated with the database. Has two files. MDF, it's called as LDF, two files. MDF is the metadata file and LDF is the log data file. Okay, so whenever you have the database, how many files it contains? So it's same as TXT, but it's its own format. So like Word has its own format .doc, PDF is own format. All what they're doing, they're storing the data in the pages, right? So the same thing, the SQL server has their own file. So every database management system, they have their own database files, with their own extension. So this is the extension, the two files that comes with the database. So each database contains two files, MDF and LDF. So the adventureworks.mdf, adventureworks.ldf. Now why do you have two files? It goes with, so this MDF is called as metadata file. Okay, it's a metadata, and LDF is a log file. So if the name suggests, log data file logs everything what you're doing on the metadata file. So let's say you insert a one row, or you insert some data in your database. First it's get recorded in here, and then it's sent to the MDF. Okay, so MDF contains your all data, but LDF records it, what it's done where. Okay, so in case of disaster, let's say think about this. Think about this. If nothing is written on the log data file and you keep just entering in here, and at some point you lost power or system fails, you don't know what happened at what point of time. What was the last transaction done. So always you can refer to the log file. Okay, I was on this transaction, I was doing this, and this was completed or not. Okay, the LDF contains basically the record, each thing's done, that will make sure give you the durability. Okay, so now we talked about this. Now let's see, we want to quickly talk about the 3-tier system, okay, or multi-tier system. So when you will be working in the real-time environment, right now you just have one server, right? Or you have one database. When you will be working, you're gonna have development, you're gonna have QA, and you're gonna have production. So the same database adventure works with a version of development, with the version of QA, and with the version of production. Everything will be same. It's just you will be working on development version. The testing people, whatever you have written, what's the accuracy, how much it's correct, if there are any bugs on it, would be found by the QA. They will send back you to fix it in the development environment, and then once you're done, you send it again to the QA. They test it, they make sure everything is correct, and it's released to production. So the production is facing to the customer. So why you have 3 separate systems? Because think about, if you do something directly in the prod and if you have bug in code, the customer's gonna have problems, right? So you make sure before you release your code to the production, all your queries you have written, there is no bug in that. It's doing it what it's intended to do. Okay, so development you do, then you make sure it's checked by other people, and then everything is good, it goes to the prod. Okay, so other companies have one more layer in between. So that's why I was calling it multi-tier system. They have a regression system, which is very similar to production, but what they do is everything is same to production, but it's just tested by another team to make sure when we release the code to the prod, it's not degrading the performance. It's not when we release the code in the actual production, and then instead of previously the things was running in like 2 minutes, now it's running in 10 minutes. Okay, so they make sure those timings, how much time it's taking, all in the regression. Okay, the big companies have that, not like if the small, they try to get like 2 or 3 systems, that's it. Okay, so does it make sense why you have like 3-tier multi-tier system? So you can move your code step by step before moving it to the customer. So that's the 3-tier system. Now the another last thing that we're going to talk about today is where it is. Yes, we will be almost done in 10 minutes. We have 10 more minutes. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is objects in the SQL Server. What are the objects in the SQL? So you have server, we talked about a lot. We have databases in the server. Now each database contains different objects. Each database has different objects. Now what are the objects in the SQL Server? The objects in the SQL Server are tables. Tables where you store the data. The stored procedures, which is to get the data out of the tables. So you write something when the user logs in so he can see the data. When you save the data, you write a procedure to save the data. So you need certain routine to get the data and to save the data in your database. So those are like procedures or functions. So the objects are tables, procedures, functions, triggers, jobs, to move the data around nightly, jobs, and then you have views. We're going to talk about all those different objects throughout the course. We're going to get into the detail. Okay, so the objects in the SQL Server are nothing but the tables, procedures, functions, all those. All right, so if you look in here, you have multiple tables. Okay, and if I expand one of the tables, in here you have triggers, which is one object. The table itself is an object. If I go to another folder which is called programmability, I have stored procedure functions. So these are the things that we're gonna learn: how to write the stored procedure, how to write functions, how to write tables, how to write triggers. All those things we're gonna run, how to create the objects in the SQL Server basically. Okay, now object part. Now to write the object, to delete the object, to update the data, to create the table, to alter the table, to alter the object, right? Because you will be doing those things very frequently. To insert the data into the table, to get the data from the table, to create the table, to create any object, to delete any object, to drop any object, to alter. What it is it's called SQL language, which you're going to use. So do you see now SQL is where it's just to create those objects, delete those objects, alter those objects. Everything what we talked about is the other parts that are there with the SQL language, right? So the SQL language, which will be used to do those objects creation, objects change, object update, delete, we will be using the SQL language. So the SQL has the SQL statements are of three types. Okay, so SQL, three types of statements are there. How many types of SQL statements are there? Three types of SQL statements: DDL, DML, and DCL. The DDL is a data definition language. Okay, so it's a data definition language. Data definition language. Okay, so this is the second one is data manipulation language. And the DCL is the data control language. Okay, now what this, so even right now if you see just the name, it helps you to understand what is the definition, data definition language would be. So definition is you are defining the object, so like, or destroying the object. So definition is creating the object, or so the DDL contains this thing. DDL, data definition language, has CAD, create, alter, and drop. Okay, so it's a short form for you to remember what are the commands in the DDL. Create is a SQL command. Okay, create, alter, and delete, all these are SQL command. Sorry, not delete, drop in here, sorry. So D is for drop. So create, alter, drop, these are the three SQL syntax, or the in data definition language, these are the three syntaxes that you're going to use to do changes to the object, which is alter, to create a new object, or if you no longer use that object, you're going to drop that object. So you will be using create, alter, and drop. Okay, all right. Now how about, so you created table, you altered table. Now if you have to insert the data, you have to get the data, you have to update the data, you have to delete the data. Which is next? What you're trying to do? You're trying to manipulate the data, manipulate. So the DML is a data manipulation language which deals with data manipulation. Okay, so which has SUDI is the short form for you to remember, which is select, update, insert, and delete. So all these four syntaxes are applied on the data, right? So these four words, this is for object. Okay, do anything with the object. This is for data manipulation language. Okay, so if you have to do anything with the data, insert, select, update, and delete, you will be using the data manipulation language. But where do you store your data? Where do you store your data? You store the data in the object, which is table. So to create the table, drop the table, alter the table, you will be using this. So the data is stored in the table. So to do, or if you have to get the data, you will be using DML, but if you have to create the object, you will be using DDL. Now what's the third one? DCL is a data control language, which is to give access, which is GR, basically grant and revoke. So it's basically to give permissions to the user who can access the data, who cannot. What kind of data can access, what they cannot access. They give the permissions to take back the permission. So it's basically controlling your objects that you have, who can see what, all right. So we're not going to focus much on this. We're just going to see the basics of this, because this is more like the DBA thing. Okay, but we're going to concentrate when we're going to go through the course on these statements. We're going to see this very basic, but our focus throughout the course would be on this one. Okay, all right. So we're going to start with select. Okay, so we're going to see is, okay, you have the AdventureWorks database. We're going to use this database, and we have all these tables. We're going to write our select statement on all these tables. Believe me, if you understood the SQL select statement, you understood the whole SQL. If you cannot get through the select, I mean, the other parts are very small. Just, yeah, right. I mean, all those things you would be able to get it very easily because they're very uh, crunched. There is nothing much to see about this one. And a few of the commands, even if you know the select, you can write those ones. Select is the most comprehensive part of the SQL because the data can be selected in so many different ways, and select is so huge. We're gonna spend 50% of our time or 40% of our time on writing the select statement, just because after these I can finish in one class. All these create, drop, delete, these kind of things, insert. We're gonna focus on select because if you know select, you can write those. And believe me, select has the most comprehensive thing. So the graph gonna like go like bell curve, where we're gonna start, which is on the low, and then you start like getting into the complex thing, and when we end the course, it's go back down, like very basic. So in between, when we're gonna in the mid of the course, we would be on the select peak level, doing like advanced queries. Okay, so the only thing I would suggest when you're going through the course, make sure you do the practice. You watch the videos for the class, you do the practice. If you do keep things with me, I can assure you, you're gonna get very good at the end of the course. And if you won't be able to keep up with the practice, you won't be able to keep up with the class, at the end you will be back to square one, I can say that. So make sure you put your time in the course, what you started with. Keep yourself motivated. If you have any concerns, talk to me. You can call me, all right. So I will try to help. I will try to make sure you learn throughout the course. At the end you get something what you have like goal in mind, from this course. So now let's see, we have a few minutes. We're going to try to see, let's say what I want you to do is, if I have to select the data from the table, we're going to get into the select now. Okay, we're going to jump into select. I will let you finish the things that I have given you for the pre-readings. Finish that. We're going to use those things in first 2-3 classes. Okay, so now how do I write a select statement from SQL? When I have to get the data from basic table, let's say from human resources.employee, okay, either you can right click on this one and say give me top 100,000 rows from the table. Okay, so this will give you the data from the table that you have. So these are basically your rows. Each of these rows is nothing but the data that you see it's inside the table. The things that you have in here is the columns for the table. Okay, so table contains employee ID as a column, national ID number, contact ID, login ID, manager ID, title. These are the columns, and these are the data values for employee ID 1, what's their date of birth, employee ID 1, what's their title, what's their manager ID. Okay, so this is basically the data, and then you have the columns in the tables. So if you have to see the columns, what are the columns in the table, you don't have to write the query. What you can do is you can expand on the Object Explorer the table, and you will see the column folder. You expand that, you will see all the columns that you have in here. It's all arranged in here, okay, on the top row, on the header. So these are the columns you have in the table. So you don't necessarily need to run the query in order to see the columns. You mean like adding the columns in the table? Yes, you can do that. Yep. So the alter is basically command that you're going to use, but we're going to see it like in more than once we are halfway through the class. So you would be able to alter the columns in the tables. Yes, you can even edit if you want. You can even create a new column if you need. Anything you think you can do with it. Yep, you can. If you want to change the name of the column, you don't like it, I mean, you won't be able to do when you are in the actual system because it's all designed. But let's say you can rename the column when it's in the design phase. Yes, you can do it. Yep. But what we're going to focus right now on how to select the data from the tables, how to use the column information and everything. So let's say what do you do is to write the basic select. If I ask you, can you give me what's the data in my table human resources.employee, right? This is my table, human resources.employee. What's the data in there? So to write that, to get the data, your basic, very simple statement would be select star from and your table name. Okay, so don't worry about this for now. Select star from table name, which is human resources.employee. Okay, select star from human resources.employee. When you do this, it's going to give you, so select basically helps you to select what columns do you need from the table. When you say star, it means yes. So you have to add the star, so you don't need to mention all the column names. Okay. If you don't want to mention all the column names, you just say to star, and then SQL will understand that you want to see all the columns from the table. Okay. So select star basically gives you all the column from the table that have. But let's say what do you want to do is you want to see only employee ID and their birth date. What you can do is you do select, you don't do star this time because you don't want to see all the columns. So you say this time I want to select only employee ID, okay, and you put each columns would be separated by comma. You don't put the star. Star is only if you want to see all the columns. But this time I want to see only two columns, employee ID and their birth date. So I have to mention that. So I would do is select, I want to select two columns, that is birth date and employee ID from my table name. Alright, so when you do this, you will be selecting only two columns from the table. Alright, so you do this and you get only two columns. So the select statement, if you put star, it gives you all, but you can have column names separated by comma to select only columns that you need. Because sometimes you don't need to see everything from the table, you just need particular few columns. So you're going to put those columns in the select list. And the from contains the table name. Now you have noticed one thing, when I have the D small, it gave me error. So the AdventureWorks is a case sensitive database where it doesn't allow you even the small and the caps error. So you have to have exact. If it says E caps, you have to have E caps. If you put E small, it will error out. Okay, so it's called as a case sensitive database. AdventureWorks is when you go to the real time, it won't be not fix it, because the way the architect designed the database, they said I want the user to write the queries in the case sensitive way. So when the database is designed, that time the decision is taken, I want the database to make case sensitive. So the birth date in B capital and D capital is a different than if I write a birth date in this SQL database in the AdventureWorks. If the database is not case sensitive, then you write this way or this way, it doesn't matter. But because the database is case sensitive, you cannot, these two things means two different columns. Okay. All right. So select column name separated by comma if you have selecting columns, and then you say from, and then from the table name. Okay. All right. So right now when you do select star from human resources, what do you get in here? You're getting 290 rows from the table. So that means there are 290 employees in the table for which you are getting the information. So if I ask you, can you give me I want to see all the information about employee ID 136. What are you going to do? You're just not going to sit through and scroll down on employee ID 136. Let's say you want to see information, all the information about employee ID 136. So I mean, it's not a good way, to sit through and scroll and until you find 136. What if you have 1 million rows, right? So what you do is basically you are filtering the data from the table, right? What you need to do, you need to filter. You don't want to see everything. All you want is where employee ID is 136, right? So what do you do is you say, okay, I'm going to take this query because I want to see everything from the table, all the columns. All I need to do is I say filter is put by the where. How do you put the filter on the data? Is by using the where clause. So you say where employee, on which column do you want to put filter? Employee ID, right? So you say where employee ID is equals to 136. So basically where is to filter the data, and you say the column name on which you want to put the filter, and you say equals to 136. So when you run this query, you're not gonna get all the rows 290, it's just get you one. So now it's easier, you can see all the information, you don't need to scroll, it's right in front of you. Okay, so now if I ask you, Victoria, you know what, I want to see employee ID 136, but I only want to see his birth date. What do you do? You know, why are you giving me all this information? All I need is the birth date. All I care about is the birth date. So what should I alter this query? What I want is, do you want to see the national ID number? Do you want to see contact ID? No, right? You don't want to see any of these columns. You just want to see birth date. So where do you make the change so that only birth date would appear? You replace the star with birth date and you run the query. Right? Because what we started with, if you don't want to see all the columns, you replace the column with the column name. So I did the same thing. I replaced the star with the birth date because I want to see only birth date for that employee, right? You see? So if I want to see their employee ID as well in the when I see the query, what do? You just add the employee ID column in here in front. Employee ID separated by comma, and then you run the query. Oops. You select and you run. Okay. All right. Yep. So what we're gonna do is now, if I ask you, can you give me employee ID 136 and 137? You cannot do, you cannot just say 137 in here. No. The equals to is a singular. You can do twice. Yeah. Good call. That's one thing. Yep. So you can do 136 and 137. You can do the query 2 times. Perfect. That would be the one way to do it, and you run the query and you get the data. But if you have to do 136, 137, 138, 139, you're not going to do 4 times, So the way is, so the equals to is what I said is a singular. The plural is in. What's that? It's in. So instead of equals to, you're going to use in. That will allow you to pass multiple value for the employee ID. So the in is, you write in the square bracket all the values that you want to pass to the employee ID. So I say I want to say employee ID 136, 137 and 138. Okay. All right. And I run the query and I'm going to get all the 3 employees and their birth date. Okay. So if you have multiple, you can just put comma separated. So all these are the data value or the employee ID value that you're passing. So you can just keep comma separated and enter like 151, whatever you want. Okay. So if you have multiple values, you're going to use in, but if you have one value, you're going to use equal to. Okay. So now if I ask you, can you give me all the employee from 1 to 100? You're just not going to type everything in here. What you're going to do is, that's what we're going to introduce in the next class. How to make, that's called as comparison operators in the SQL. So we're going to talk about comparison operators in the next class. So we started the thing, it's just we need to keep going on. So we're going to learn comparison operators that would help you to do those kind of stuff. How can I see, from employee ID 1 to 150 or from employee 1 to 50 and then 100 to 150. So how to do those ranges, all those kind of stuff. All right. So, and let's say one more thing in here. When you're selecting the data, now if I ask you, can you give me, okay, so this would be the question for you. Can you give me all the employees who their title, all the tool designers from this table? What would you do? I want to see all the information about the tool designer. What would you do this to query? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what you're trying to do? You're trying to do you're trying to find the tool. Where you're trying to find, in which column? In title. So basically, do you want to see all these marketing manager, marketing? No. So are you filtering the data by tool designer? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. Yep. Yeah. That's it. Good. Perfect. Yep. Got it. So what you're trying to do is, because you have to filter the data, as you know, when you filter the data, so this is your column, and I say I only want to see tool designer. So basically you're filtering and you don't want to see everything. So you say, okay, I want to say that where title is tool designer, you know. So you're gonna get it, but it's okay. It's just, that's why I'm, make sure we do one thing and we do the practice for it right away. We're gonna see one example. So do you see any difference between what I write in here with what I write in above? Do you see any difference between the two queries? The difference is, I use the single quotes, right? But I don't use it here. So the good practice is, whenever you have the data value, always use single quotes. Don't put it like this. Okay, that's the first lesson from the class. Take away. Never put the data value directly. So this time it ran, but if I try to do the same with the tool designer, it's not gonna run. It's gonna error out. So when you put the single quotes around all your data values which is in your table, you're never gonna get an error, never ever. But if you don't put the single quotes, you might get an error, you might not. So you don't want to run into that situation, so you always put single quotes around. Sorry? Oh, you mean this tool designer? Oh, so this is basically because it's a data value. So this is in green, it means these are the objects. It's in red, it means it's a SQL statement. So basically it gives you the visualization. Now when it errors, it looks like this. The red, see this thing? That's when the error is in the query. Okay, so when you have the squeezy lines, that's when you have the error. So basically when you have this kind of thing, the blue is your syntax, the black is your objects. The black is your objects, and this is your data. So whenever you put the data, when you're taking from the table where employee ID equals to 6, 36, or date of birth equals to 1949, everything goes in the single quotes. No exception. That's a good practice. When we talk about the good practice, I always put single quotes around the data value. Okay, so that's the takeaway from the today's class, that whenever you put the data value anywhere in the query, you always put in the single quote. We're going to talk about why do you need the single quote when we're going to go later. Don't worry about this, but all you remember is the single quotes. Alright. Too much for today, I think, and we're going to stop in here. And what I would do is try to watch the, keep working on your stuff that you have already. And we're going to meet on Monday, tomorrow, and we're going to start with the comparison operators, and we're going to get into the detail. So any questions? It will take time. We're going to practice this a lot, so don't worry about this much. What I can do is I can send you the video, so if you want to watch it again to see how the queries are working. That's it for today.